especially watching Newcastle. I mean, those guys are a bunch of douchebags on the field sometimes. What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Planet Soccer here on YouTube. We got a little Tuesday matinee action, and we're talking rules today. Big fun one.
Woo!
I know everybody's been looking forward to. Good timing for this one, though. Maybe even a little late for those of you who have seen some comments that have come out in the last week. Officiating rules and the interpretation of rules has been really at the forefront of a lot of discussion this year. We've seen increased number of cards all across the board, yellow, red. We've seen a lot of new rules implemented in several leagues. I think the reason rules are so important in soccer, Dylan, is because, as we've said before, soccer is a blank canvas, which kind of creates the nickname, the beautiful game. It's basically nonstop action. There's no, like in football, you got to play, it stops, you restart. Even in basketball, it's more free flowing, but you got inbounds after baskets and everything. I'd probably compare soccer most closely to hockey, but the rink is so much smaller. There are line changes, there are stoppages, all of that. So rules, whether it be fouls, offsides, obviously you've got out of bounds. Those don't really fall in the category of rules, but it's really the only thing that dictates any stoppage of play or any just kind of break in the flow of soccer games. So there have been numerous rule changes throughout the years. Offsides has changed multiple times. You can look up the history of offsides. I won't word vomit that. You've also had the pass back rule. You used to be able to pass it back to the keeper and they could pick it up with their hands. Back in the 70s and 80s, you saw several dynasties happen because of that. Most notably, AC Milan was famous for it back in the late 80s. But today in 2023, there have been new rules implemented and already some questionable calls that we will kind of use to talk about the new rules in the Premier League. But let's start off with the Mike Dean comments. Mike Dean was a now former official in the Premier League. Was he the VAR, like head VAR guy?
I believe so, yeah.
He was also on field for a lot of his career, but
Yes.
basically what VAR is it's kind of like the review booth in football. They'll send a call down to the review booth or to New York, wherever the case may be. It's similar in the Premier League, but it's not a third party. It's a group of officials who just aren't on field, basically interpreting a call up in the booth. There was an incident last year in the Tottenham-Chelsea game where Christian Romero gave himself an unfair advantage by pulling Mark Cucurella's hair. Tottenham ended up leveling the game on that event, and VAR straight up missed it. Mike Dean essentially came out and said, missed it. He came out and said, I am buddies with Anthony Taylor, who was the ref on the field. I didn't necessarily want to put him in a bad spot, so I just kind of let it go. It ended up being a huge call, resulted in a point for Tottenham and 2 missed points for Chelsea. That brings into question, let me say, he's not the only one that does that. And that's where the issue really lies. So Dylan, after hearing Mike Dean's comments, and we even put out a poll last week saying, do you think VAR normally gets the call right or wrong, not including offsides, because that's a little bit more easy to tell. But on these kind of judgment calls, where do you sit after the Mike Dean comments, Dylan?
Before the Mike Dean comments, I always kind of thought of myself as like a Big Six conspiracy theorist, if you will. Yeah. It felt like something, as being a Newcastle fan, we're challenging for the Big Six. So we were admittedly at times grasping at straws, saying how much the Premier League favors the big sides. In the specific instance he's touching on, it was 2 Big Six clubs. So it doesn't necessarily completely solidify or validate those feelings we had as Newcastle fans, or fans of the other 14 teams in the Premier League. But it certainly puts into question, how right were we about it? It feels a lot more plausible now that former officials, I should say, are coming out admitting that they didn't
Yeah.
use VAR at all times to its fullest and truest intent. And I think that puts into question a lot. I mean, soccer has been rife with actual corruption in the past, actual match fixing in the past, more so than any
Like
other
people have
sport,
gone to
really.
jail and stuff like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
more so than we've really seen in any other sport since like what the Black Sox scandal in the U.S. in the early 1900s. Like that's the closest
Yeah.
comparison we have to some of the corruption in soccer. So soccer's always kind of had that underlying question of officiating and validity of official decisions. So it was something that it was kind of hush hush. We all kind of thought it was probably true still in the Premier League, but nothing official, no like hard evidence. But this is about as hard of evidence as we're probably ever going to get. A former official admitting a very blatant miscall was just him protecting his mate, as he put it. So
Literally, yeah, that's literally what he said.
it puts into question a lot of stuff, not only in past years but moving forward. I don't think the FA is completely nipped it in the bud either. They've come out and they released one of their famous statements that they like to do almost every week at this point for a missed call, saying it was a one-off. It was something that's not polluting the game in England. I don't buy it, especially when you
They
have
were
an official
obliterated in
coming
the
out.
replies.
Yes,
Absolutely obliterated in the
rightfully so.
replies. Yeah.
Rightfully so.
Yeah. So, another thing that I think about, and we're not going to we're going to talk about the rules mostly in this episode, but another thing I want to mention that just after kind of, learning about soccer and especially in England, these refs grew up from boyhood supporting certain clubs, and it was likely some of the big six. So I do think there's definitely validity to, obviously, officials in every sport across the globe. I have an unnamed friend whose father is an NFL referee. He grew up a Cowboys fan, but they go through extensive training, and there's really they're held accountable for that kind of stuff. I feel like accountability isn't always present in officiating in the Premier League. They've done a better job recently. They've suspended some on-field and VAR officials. However, there's no way that bias doesn't set in. But
Yeah,
we're not here to talk about official.
real quick about the
Yeah.
biases before we move on. There is a very interesting map that floats around Newcastle Twitter a couple times a year of where Premier League officials are from, and it is heavily Manchester, heavily London.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that, as you said, most likely those individuals grew up likely United fans based on their age and not City fans and supporters of some London clubs. So I do think it's something that the FA really should hone in on, bringing in officials possibly from other parts of the globe even. There's plenty of high quality officials that grew up in, Spain that could officiate in the Premier League, or grew up in the United States, or grew up in Africa, that might not have quite as obvious biases. Granted, Premier League's the biggest league in the world. It's going to be really hard to find officials who didn't grow up at least consuming to some extent the Premier League and would have some biases put in there. But I do think we kind of have to reevaluate. We being English football have to kind of reevaluate who our officials are and what that training and accountability looks like. We've seen a lot of people comment that they want to start seeing post game pressers for officials. I don't think that will ever happen. We don't see that in any other sport. But the thing for me that I would really like to see, that we saw in the Women's World Cup, and I believe we see in France now, in Ligue 1, that all VAR decisions are explained after the fact. In the Premier League, they just come out, they signal their decision, penalty, no penalty, and we move on without offering some sort of explanation. And in the NFL and college football, in the NHL, we see when they come back from those video review decisions what led to their decision, why, some sort of explanation is this is why we've made that decision, and we don't get that right now in English football. And I think that would be something that would go a long way in that kind of accountability. If you want to make this decision, tell the world why you're making this decision. Don't just make it and then hide behind we can't do interviews. I think a lot of accountability issues could be fixed if they have to announce the reasoning behind those VAR decisions. That wouldn't necessarily be applicable in the Mike Dean situation because it didn't even go to VAR. The match official didn't go over and review it. So in the specific Mike Dean instance that has been quoted, it wouldn't have been applicable, but I think it would go a long way in overall trust of officiating decisions.
Yep. Moving on, I think one thing that's at the forefront now of officiating in soccer is technology. Technology comes into play heavily in offsides. And there's some new offsides rules / technology usages that some leagues are adopting, some leagues aren't. Dylan, I'm going to let you take the lead on this one. It's probably the most, besides just your common foul in a game, offsides is probably what we see most in a match. So talk about the offsides. What's changed? What is the Premier League not doing that's noteworthy?
I was going to say, and the Premier League hasn't changed on offsides.
Yeah,
we've seen some other leagues and competitions adopting the semi-automated, where it's essentially AI technology using all video footage available to determine if a player has a body part in an advantageous position in comparison to a defender when a ball is played. We've seen it adopted in the most recent Men's World Cup last fall, winter, whatever you want to call it. Seen it in the Women's World Cup, seen it in Champions League. La Liga has adopted it, Serie A has adopted it, and the Premier League, without much explanation, other than them coming out saying, hey, we're not adopting it, didn't adopt it. And they didn't really give us a real reason as to why. I think we kind of see something similar in baseball with the strike zone. A lot of traditionalists don't want to see it go to an automated system. I think that's likely where the FA was coming from in that decision, wanting to not automate the game and have some of that human error, because it is, as those fans and people claim, it's just part of the game, that human error. But in my opinion, if the technology's there, we might as well utilize it.
Especially because you only have basically three on-field referees and then 1/4 official. It's a lot of work for those guys to, determine that. And I know it can go to a review, but it's not that laser technology, which is the most accurate. I mean, it's like NASA technology. Basically, you can see exactly where the elbow bone is. It makes sense to me, and I don't know why it's not adopted in the Premier League.
The FA came out when they decided not to, and said, well, instead we're just going to install 4 extra cameras in every Premier League ground and use that to assist our VAR officials in making those decisions. And while that is an improvement over what we've had in the past, it's like this perfect solution is staring you in the face, and the FA is like, yeah, no, we're good. we're going to pass on that. And I think they're really doing themselves a disservice. I wouldn't be surprised if it decided some matches. We've seen it almost every year the past few years, matches decided by seemingly incorrect VAR offsides calls. So I think that's a huge thing that the FA kind of missed out on. The other thing of note in the offsides world of world football is the new Arsene Wenger proposed, essentially, offsides to open up the game, give more scoring. And that would be, right now, if any body part is beyond the last defender, it's considered an offsides position. So that can be, your hand at this point in time. And you've in the past been very against a hand being considered offsides because it's not a body part you can score with. So some leagues, at UEFA's request, are implementing a new rule for offsides where your whole body has to be beyond that last defender, which is super interesting. I think it completely changes the dynamic, and you touched on it at the beginning of the episode, how much the implementation of rules affects the style of play. So we're going to see this year Italy, the Netherlands, and Sweden adopting this new offsides rule on behalf of UEFA, giving it kind of a test run, if you will.
Victor
to
Osimhen is going to have a field day in Serie A with that rule.
Yes, he is. Now, the question
in my opinion, though,
go ahead.
That's the spirit. That's the spirit of the offsides rule, in my opinion. Though it's like making sure that you're not just camping back behind the last defender. It's not okay. Is his fingernail offsides? Like, come on, guys. That's not like that's just ridiculous. I mean, he has to be, in my opinion, if I were making the rule, I would agree with what they're doing in Serie A. You have to be beyond the last defender. If you're dragging your foot, even with the defender, you're good. So I really
that's like
like
in
the
hockey. I mean,
implementation.
hockey that's
Yeah,
like part of becoming, and I think it will take some adjustment for both attackers and defenders, but that's part of hockey is dragging your foot as you come into the offensive zone,
yep.
crossing that blue line, making sure just a tip of your blade is still in the neutral zone or on the line.
You see it with
Is
almost
considered
every offensive
onside.
rush in hockey. I mean, it's
Right,
like
right. I mean,
it's a
it's a huge
skill that those players
it's a
have to
huge part of
have.
the game, and it's something that attackers are going to have to adjust to. I do feel bad for defenders. You've defended one way literally your whole life with offside traps, and now that
Yeah,
offside trap looks completely different. So it will be really interesting to kind of see. I watched part of the Inter game yesterday, and I watched part of the AC game on what was that Saturday when Pulisic scored. But I haven't consumed a ton of Serie A yet to really get a feel for it. But I will be interested to see what that implementation, the kind of effects that have when they do go play in Champions League, because Champions League will be on that old school previous rule system where even a fingertip will have you offside. So it will be interesting to see how those Italian, Dutch, and Swedish teams kind of are able to adjust back and forth with those rules throughout the year.
yeah. Moving on, I kind of want to lump these two together. There's time wasting and stoppage time that has changed in the Premier League. The stoppage time rule, we saw it very clearly surprisingly almost for the first time in the World Cup when we were seeing 11, 12 minutes of stoppage time. It seemed wild and outlandish. But like you said, Dylan, earlier off air, the time in play for soccer games is only like 55 minutes or so. This is a rule that really benefits the fans getting to see more action, more actual on field, um, you know, run of play. However, the players are going to have to play an extra 20 minutes per game, maybe. So um, that's and we've already seen teams equalize late in stoppage time. We saw in the Community Shield, Arsenal scored very very late into stoppage time, and then time wasting is now in kind of relation to that. It's kind of um, harped on more. It's under a microscope more. So talk about both those, the relation and kind of what you've seen. I know, especially with Trent's yellow in the Newcastle Liverpool game, it's just been very interesting to see so far.
Yeah, for me, the stoppage time, the increase of stoppage time makes a lot of sense for me. We've seen already an over a 30% increase in ball in play this season compared to last season in the Premier League. Similar numbers we saw in the World Cup, and I think that's why the Premier League has somewhat adopted a similar mindset to stoppage
Yeah,
time. Before it was pretty run of the mill, 1 or 2 minutes at halftime and 3 or 4 minutes at full time, and it seemed really ambiguous. You could have a player down injured for 4 minutes in the first half and you're only getting a minute of stoppage time. It's like, why are we not utilizing stoppage? It was put in place at the creation of the game essentially to make sure that stuff is accounted for, because it is a running clock, which we don't really see in American sports at all. So it is incredibly important to keeping the game free flowing, keeping the game at maximum goal scoring opportunities. So like you said, at the end, it really is for the fans to make sure the fans are getting exposed to as much ball in play soccer as humanly possible. Last year, like you said, the ball was only in play like 55 minutes out of 90 minutes. So we need to see some sort of increase on ball in play for the fans.
yeah,
Another really interesting aspect, you talked about how it will require players to play, an extra 10 to 20 minutes a game. And some players have been very vocal, some managers as well, very vocal about the fact that they're not ready for that. They're not able to implement that. Part of me goes, figure it out. I know that
mhm,
sounds a little insensitive, but because I'm not the one having to perform at the highest level for an extra 15 to 20 minutes, but
yeah,
they're professional athletes. They'll figure it out. They'll learn the conditioning to make it work. But one side is going to really, really impact positively is the striker. I saw a really interesting interview, well, not interview, episode of Callum Wilson and Mikel Antonio's podcast where Callum, half tongue in cheek, you can tell he's frustrated by not being the starting striker at Newcastle anymore. But he said something to the effect of, "But now if I come in at the 65th minute, I really in theory have 35 minutes of play as opposed to 25 minutes of play, and it's just that extra opportunity as a backup striker or a bench striker to
Yeah.
come in fresh legs, running at defenders on tired legs. Defenders, it hurts a lot because defenders we never really see subbed unless there's an injury or a card situation.
Right.
So defenders are the ones that are really going to have to figure out that conditioning, but it does allow those second strikers on a team to have the opportunity to come on fresh and get an extra 10 minutes of run. And so Callum had said something like, hey, with this extra stoppage time, if it means I get 2 more goals this season, but I'm coming off the bench all year, I don't care. Like, I just want to
Yeah.
score. Like that. At the end of the day, that's all strikers really care about is winning and scoring, and it just gives them further opportunity to score. So I think the importance of having a truly high class, high quality secondary striker on your roster is going to be highly important. We saw that for Liverpool. Darwin Nunez came on, $85 million man, came off the bench in the 72nd minute and scored twice, running at tired legs, especially in that stoppage time when he was able to get his second. Running at Dan Burn, who was playing down the left side, left back position, had to get moved over to left center back. So he was very clearly tired, out of position, out of place. And you have a striker like Darwin running at you in that situation. That's really tough as a defender. But it's just something that teams are going to have to figure out. Maybe we see more of, because there is an extra substitution. Maybe we start to see teams use subs on defenders, knowing that the game is going to be 10 minutes longer than we're used to. So I think it's something that
Yeah.
people will have to adjust to as far as managers and players. But overall, it seems like something a year from now, if we do stay on this trajectory, it's not even going to be like in our mind. It's just going to be, well, this is how it is. And as
Right.
fans, we get an extra 10 minutes of ball in play.
Yeah. And kind of going along hand in hand with that, time wasting is now a cardable offense. We saw it in the Newcastle Liverpool game, Trent. I think he was fouled on the Anthony Gordon
I do
fouled
too.
him,
I do too.
but then Trent, he goes out of bounds and he just tosses the ball back onto field, and he got carded for time wasting. That was very early on in the game, I think within the 20-ish minutes.
First 20 minutes or so.
And a few minutes later, he fouls Anthony Gordon by kind of pushing him with his forearm on the neck. And the official's in a tough spot there because, like, that's a yellow card.
That's a yellow, right?
Yeah.
Point
So
blank
Trent should have
period,
been
it's
off.
yellow.
But obviously it's in the back of his mind. Well, shit, like the time wasting thing, it wasn't something that he should be sent off for if he just gets his first normal second yellow. So it's tough on officials there. I think. I think maybe the time wasting card should be more heavily focused on in the second half. That might be controversial, but because you need to be consistent with it. But we saw it impact the game. I mean, Liverpool in theory should have been playing with 9 men. So
right.
Um,
I do think that. I mean, I do think that's really interesting. And you and I think. Full disclosure, I don't know if we said this. We initially recorded this last week, but with the Mike Dean news, we decided to put a pause on it and re-record with the Mike Dean news. But in that episode, I kind of asked you the question of, do we feel that a second yellow is looked at the same way as a first yellow? And we were purely talking about fouls.
Right.
Like how much more can you get away with an individual foul after you're already on a yellow? And I think that was on full display in that Trent situation. That 100%, 10 out of 10 times should be a yellow, but because he got a yellow for, you can say it's a silly rule, but it is a rule now. It is a time wasting rule. You cannot keep the opponent from putting the ball back in play at their own pace. It will be really interesting to see. I think it loses a lot of teeth, the giving of a yellow, if you then are allowed to go commit a second yellow essentially and get away with it. Like, okay, I don't care about my time wasting yellow, then I'm going to time waste till the sun comes up, and I know I'm free and clear on my second yellow because they don't want to send me off with one of my yellows being for time wasting. So I think that's going to be super unique. I do think there have been a couple of occasions. The one that sticks out to me most was just a preseason game. It was the most recent. But sometimes the tactic of not allowing your opponent to put the ball back in play can be kind of entertaining. There was an example in the Newcastle preseason. Pope came darting out of his box, was definitely in the middle third at that point, and headed it out of bounds. And as he's running out of bounds, they have the balls on the little cones ready for ball boys to give to put a ball
Yeah.
back in play, and he just kicked that ball on the field so they couldn't play. So like stuff like that, it's kind of funny. It's kind of like a chess match. But in the future, that is a yellow card, and I think
Yeah.
at its core it should be, but it will take away some of those kind of lulls moments of guys that are like very clearly like, shit, I'm out of position, or my center back's out of position, or Trippier's down at the opponent's corner, so I'm just going to kick a ball into the middle of the field to delay stuff. I think
Yeah.
that is more the spirit of the rule than what Trent did. What Trent did by letter of the law was a yellow, but it was pretty minor offense. So I do think there will be some tweaking of that a little bit. I think in the future, what Trent did, like you said as well, and in the early stages of the first half, I don't think that's a yellow in the future. I think it is more intended for the last 20, 25 minutes. So I do think we'll see a little bit of an adjustment for that, because then it will still have a little bit of teeth to it.
Yeah, I've really only ever seen time wasting carded on goalkeepers.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm thinking about it, but it's a new wrinkle in the Premier League that we'll have to keep an eye on. Another wrinkle is dissent. What is dissent? It is
The
basically
greatest usage of a word, first of all.
Yeah.
Like, it's not arguing, it's not complaining, it's not bitching and moaning, it's dissent. So before we talk about what it is, I love the use of the word. It's a fantastic word. I don't know why I get so hung up on the usage of the word dissent, but it just encapsulates what it is. You're upset with the official and you're arguing kind of your case. I think the biggest example of it, though, is not just a single player arguing a call. I think that is somewhat going to still be allowed, because you should be able to kind of voice your opinion to the officials. It's more when you see 8 players from one team surrounding an official. There's a fantastic photo of Arsenal. I don't remember against who last year, but you can literally count 9 guys circled around the official arguing a card. And like that needs to stop. That is where you get, I don't want to put my buddy official in a bad place where he's got to deal with that shit. So that's really where I think the big change is going to be. And I think we've already started to see it a little bit. The mimicking, it should be a yellow, is getting carded. I think that's a little disrespectful, so I can respect that. But the biggest thing for me is keeping players away from the officials. They have an extremely hard job. At the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, they are doing their best, or what they see as their best effort to call the game fairly. So I do think it is a little bit unfair and disrespectful when you have 9 guys hounding an official over a call.
Yeah, dissent is the expression or holding of opinions at variance, at variance with those previously or officially held. So basically a bunch of players coming up and disagreeing with what the official said. So
keep it more, in my opinion, keep it more like hockey. There's a reason you have a captain. So in any foul situation, I think the player booked, or the player assessed the foul, or the player that was fouled, and each team's captains are the only 4 essentially people that should be able to try and discuss something with an official. Because right now the captain is, you go up, you exchange banners if it's an international club competition, you shake hands and you flip a coin to see who defends where, and that's all captain really does right now. And it doesn't have a lot of on-field weight as far as officiating and conversation goes. Obviously, you're still a leader, but I'd like to see a little bit more implications put on what that captaincy means, and having that captain be your team essentially representative in those discussions.
Yeah. Last rule that we're going to talk about is one that Dylan is convinced is a Newcastle rule. He even calls it the Tindall effect, which I kept a close eye on Mr. Jason Tindall this weekend. I know who he is now. Yeah, I know who he is now. Dylan, explain to us what this Tindall rule, we'll just call it that for the sake of it. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so this one is pretty much the new rule is there's only one person from the coaching staff allowed in the technical area or on the touchline. In the past, Newcastle last year, you watched any match, there was Eddie Howe and Jason Tindall standing right next to each other in the technical area the whole game. And for the most part, it wasn't utilized poorly, in my opinion. For the most part, they were purely talking tactics. But there were certainly times where Tindall kind of became the muscle man, if you will, for Eddie Howe. Eddie Howe is notorious for not being an overly vocal manager. He's pretty much the antithesis to Klopp, who is or Arteta, who are very animated, very much always talking to that fourth official, trying to influence the game. And that's not Eddie Howe, but he had Jason Tindall essentially doing that for him. The Premier League is cracking down on that this year. You're only allowed to have one individual essentially out of the dugout. Klopp had some pretty funny comments on this. I don't know if it was in the offseason or leading up to the Newcastle match, but had a nice little dig at Newcastle saying, for some clubs, this isn't going to be a problem. We do this in UEFA all the time. For other clubs like Newcastle, we saw last year, this is going to be an adjustment. So pretty much a really big slap in the face for you guys haven't had to do this because you haven't been in Europe yet. But I do think it'll be a little interesting to see if it does get carded at all. I think 2 out of the first 3 Newcastle matches, both at City and at home against Liverpool, Tindall was very much not in the dugout the whole game, very much on the touchline, whether talking to Eddie or arguing. There was the now infamous picture of Klopp was very upset about the Trent Alexander yellow card, and then no second yellow card, and Klopp was very upset, and Tindall kind of gave him one of these and was very clearly out of the dugout, very clearly antagonizing the opposing manager. And that's the stuff that I thought this was put in place for. So I was honestly very surprised and in a weird way disappointed it wasn't carded. I love Tindall. Like, Newcastle fans love him. He loves being the center of attention. He's a very outlandish sort of individual. So I really enjoy him, but for the spirit of the rule, like, he should have been carded. I think Klopp should have been carded for arguing with the fourth official for probably 10 minutes. This is a rule that, like, we hear is implemented, but we haven't actually seen it implemented. So it's kind of yet to be seen if this was all just a bunch of mumbo jumbo conversation for nothing, or if it's something we're actually going to see implemented. But the jury's still out.
I think it'll just be implemented if something gets out of hand. I don't see a fourth official seeing an assistant walk up into the technical area, say something to a manager, give them a card right away. It'll have to be something that is warranted. So
affecting the outcome of the game or the treatment of the officials. I think treatment of the officials is really the big thing. Is they don't want somebody to necessarily have a muscle man like Tindall. Like, if you're a manager and you got a problem, take it up with the fourth official as the manager. Don't have somebody from your bench coming in to do that for you. I think that's more of the spirit of the rule, but honestly, we didn't even really see that implemented. So who knows what this rule is or isn't going to do this year.
It's there and it's available if they want to use it. So I'm sure we'll see inconsistencies with it, just as we do, as we discussed with all rules, it seems like, across the board. But that's our rules discussion. I mean, there's a lot that goes into soccer. It's a very objectively officiated sport. It's kind of on the official to, decide whether a foul is a foul. We see a lot more physicality in the Premier League than we do in Serie A, which sometimes affects English teams in the Champions League because they're used to playing so physical. So I just want to emphasize too, like, people who are maybe just getting into soccer. I know a lot of complaints are about players rolling around on the ground and doing all this. And a lot of times that, like, works. It gets fouls, it gets cards. Oftentimes it doesn't, but it is part of the game, and it's something that is potentially changing. So it'll be interesting to see. Just know that it is part of the game, and it's what makes it fun sometimes, honestly, especially watching Newcastle. I mean, those guys are a bunch of douchebags on the field sometimes.
I can't disagree with that.
But we appreciate. Dylan, you have anything else?
No, I'm good.
Nope.
It'll be interesting to see how it affects things, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to completely change the game until we see if we see a change to the offside rule throughout all Europe. I think that's the biggest thing to note here is the possibility of offsides fully changing.
Yep. Well, we appreciate you guys watching. As always, this is episode 2 of, I think, like 4 we're coming out with this week. So we got Champions League draw on Thursday. Dylan is very excited for that, just as I was last year. That's going to be a tough pot 4 opponent for whoever they get put into. I don't know how Newcastle's pot 4, but
that's what happens when you don't play European football for 15 years, 10 years.
I guess whatever. So. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, share, and just interact in general. We love the negative comments. We love the positive comments. throw us a subscription. You never even have to watch our
Apparently,
videos.
we've never watched Messi play soccer, according to one of our commenters. So keep it coming.
Yeah.
We love to hear it. We love to see it all. Don't hesitate.
Yeah.
Let us have it.
That's right. We'll talk to y'all next time.